Stay tuned. Coming up in this episode, it's part one of my two-part interview with Fire Chief Mike Beutler as he shares the details of being trapped under a collapsed roof at a commercial building fire. But first, let's pay the bills. Today's episode is sponsored by Midwest Fire. For more than 20 years, Midwest Fire has been manufacturing high-quality tankers, tanker pumpers, and fire rescue vehicles in the United States and Canada. Keeping firefighters safe while enhancing their capabilities is what they do best. To learn more, go to MidwestFire.com. Hello and welcome to episode 292 of the Situational Awareness Matters show. I'm your host, Rich Gassaway. The purpose of this program is to help improve situational awareness and high-risk decision-making for individuals and teams who work in high-stress, high-consequence, time-compressed environments with changing conditions. The SA Matters mission is simple. We want to help you see the bad things coming and time to avoid bad outcomes. I'm coming to you today from my office in St. Paul, Minnesota, having just returned from conducting two situational awareness programs, one for the Illinois Fire Chiefs Association at their annual conference in Peoria, and the other one at the International Electrical Linemen's Rodeo in Overland Park, Kansas. And for those of you who haven't been following my social media, on October 10th, I returned from completing a pilgrimage called the Camino de Santiago, or the Way of St. James, where I walked 500 miles across Spain. If you want to learn more about it, just Google search the Camino de Santiago. If you want to see some of the pictures from my pilgrimage, just check them out on my Facebook feed. Today's feature segment is brought to you by Sims You Share. Sims You Share is a simple and affordable way to help you develop and practice situational awareness skills. You can quickly build sims from your photos to simulate almost any kind of incident, including active threat scenarios. And the new Sims You Share Command Training Center now lets you conduct multi-company drills over the internet, so you can even run drills while your companies stay in station. Check them out at simsyoushare.com. Okay, let's jump into our feature segment, part one of my two-part interview with Fire Chief Mike Beutler as he shares the details of being trapped under a collapsed roof at a commercial building fire. So, take us onward to your career. Now, you're in discussing your career, we're going to have to go past the date where the incident occurred. So just advance us in your career from that beginning in 1978 up to the current day and where you're at and how that progressed.
Okay. So, like I said, I joined in June of 78, right after I graduated from high school. I think I signed the papers on the day of my graduation. And within about 2 weeks of starting as a volunteer, the chief at the time called me and said there was an opening in the the sleeper program. And the sleeper program, we had 3 college age, early 20s aspiring firefighters per shift. The department had 2 paid guys on shift that worked 24/48s. We came in at 7 o'clock at night roughly and gave a full crew through the night. So we slept there, and it was a great opportunity because there really wasn't anything we weren't allowed to do. Drive the trucks on code 3 runs because of insurance, but when it came to firefighting, we were the first in the door. So it was a great experience. Late 70s, early 80s, the time things were burning. So I had a lot of great experience at some good burners.
Okay, and then take us from beyond the sleeper program and where you went from there.
I went back and forth with the sleeper program. They converted it to a student program, spent time as a volunteer. I left the department in 82, moved out and kind of stepped away from the fire service for a while. And in the mid 80s, I just realized that, yeah, it's just too much of a part of my life and I missed it. And so I started exploring the sales side of things. And I landed my first sales job in 1986 selling Can-Am fire apparatus, which was based out of Canada. It was kind of like an E1 knockoff, and wheel coach ambulances. And that kind of planted the seed for the equipment sales. And in the early 90s, went to work for Wheel Coach as a factory sales rep and spent time there, sold other products. Sold ambulances clear in the early 2000s. Had a couple other positions, went to work for Akron Brass. I was their Northwest rep for a number of years. I spent time as a contract administrator for a local builder. And currently I run the fire division for Mallory Safety and Supply in Longview, Washington. We build wildland fire apparatus. So I was charged with basically lighting a new fire into that business. And so that's what I'm doing right now. And my wife had inherited the house that she grew up in on Puget Island, which is a small island in the Columbia River, about roughly 40 miles inland from the coast, and small volunteer department. And I missed being a volunteer and approached the chief and said, hey, I'm interested. And he basically said, what are you waiting for? And so I joined up in 2013, and 2016, he was ready to retire, and the people who I thought were in line to take the position didn't desire to do it. So I threw my hat in the ring, and the commissioners decided I was the most skilled and knowledgeable and gave me the title. So I've been chief there since August of 2016.
Well, congratulations or condolences. I'm not sure. It can go both ways at times, right?
It has. All things are going really good right now. We've got a great crew. It's kind of a throwback to the old days for me. We're 15 members, 2 pieces of apparatus. I'm sure there's big city engines that run more calls in a day than we run in a year. So there are very unique challenges to leading a department where you're limited to manpower, training time. It's difficult. The simple fact is we just can't do what we're supposed to be doing. We try.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go back to the fateful day in 1981 and tell us about what time of the year was that incident? Was it winter, summer?
September.
So
September,
early fall.
September.
Weather was probably seasonable.
It was an absolutely beautiful day.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Northwest Indian summer day, probably mid 60s, light breeze, beautiful blue sky. Just one of those days that makes you want to get out and be outside and enjoy it.
Yeah. Now, were you working at the fire station, or were you away from the station when the call came in?
Well, I was working as I was a volunteer at the time, and it was Sunday morning, and I was actually at church, which was across the street. And it happened to be time between Sunday school and church, and I was standing out on the front porch talking with some friends, and from across the street, I could hear the tones go off. The way we were dispatched, we had a combination dispatch over the radio, but there was also an intercom system. And when calls came in, you could just tell it was louder. And from across the street, I knew that we were getting tapped out. So I just hustled across the street, and the other guys were getting on a rig, and I asked the officer, who's here? Can I go? And he said, get your gear on, we're going. And so the officer was Jim Sprague. The engineer was Tim Dahl, and Mark Hawthorne, who was he was a sleeper at the time. He was basically hanging around the station and got the call. And
how old were you at the time of this incident?
21.
Okay.
Mark was 21 as well. Tim was probably 24, and the officer was probably 26, 27. So quite a young crew.
Yeah. And do you remember how the call was reported? I know you were across the street at the church, but did you hear anything about, the kind of call that you were going to?
I had no idea where I was going. I jumped on the engine and away we went.
Uh-huh.
So we're cruising down the road. This is a open back Seagrave chassis piece of apparatus, upper tender. So we're riding backwards. I was behind the driver and Mark was on the other side with the engine in between us. All we had was a single Motorola speaker. There was no intercom systems. There was no closed cab. We were just sitting in the back of the cab. And I hollered at Mark and said, "Where are we going?" He said, I didn't hear either, which was kind of odd. But a couple minutes down the road, we heard the dispatcher from the neighboring fire district, which was Boring Fire District, which was east of our district. So we knew we were going on a mutual aid call. Didn't know what it was. But then a little while later, engine 149, which was the first engine in, one of Boring Fire District's engines, a volunteer company, they arrived and they requested a 5-inch line to be laid by engine 45 that was coming in from Clackamas. So Mark and I kind of looked at each other wide-eyed, said, "Whew, I guess we got something here."
Yeah.
We didn't know what it was. So this was about a 11-minute response time, which even in a car, that was pretty good time. So we were cooking. Very little traffic on the road, but it's all rural roads. And about halfway there, Lieutenant Sprague reached around and rapped on the window. We just had the sliding window between the cab and the jump seats. And he pointed ahead of us, and there's a pretty good black header going up in the distance. So Mark and I both stood up at the back of the cab, which was interesting because we must have gotten the memo by that time that we had to sit down. Because when I first started, we were always standing at the back of the cab. The only time you sat down was if it was miserable, cold, horrible weather.
Yep.
But I know on a sunny morning, we would have been standing up if we could have. But the air packs were not in the compartments. They had moved them to the front of the hose body. So we had the walk-away brackets. So we stood up and backed into the air packs and rode the rest of the way strapped in and hanging on to the back of the cab and watching this header coming up. And my thought was that it was going to be an old cabinet shop that sat across the street. Again, we didn't know exactly where we were going, but based on the smoke, I thought, nah, it's the old building. And we got out to the main highway and rounded the corner, and the building was about a quarter mile up the roadway, and it wasn't the cabinet shop, but it was the strip mall on the right side of the road. So we were, I think, about the fourth piece of apparatus to arrive on scene. And at that point, the True Value hardware store, which was at the east end of the structure, was fully involved. The flames were probably 40 feet through the roof and blown out the front of the building.
Wow.
It was going really good. So engine 149, when they arrived, they went to what they saw as the seat of the fire, which was on the back side. Apparently the fire started in an electrical box on the back side. What they discovered later was that kids had been playing around the building and they had gone up into the upper part of the structure and they left the access cover off the overhang, which just happened to be right where the fire started. So fire went up the back wall and entered that scuttle hole and basically took off. But they had made the initial attack at the rear. The closest hydrants for them, either on the other side of their station that they couldn't take, or beyond the structure fire. So they pulled in behind without a supply. And I think somebody came in after them and laid down to the hydrant. But engine 45, which is about a 2000, I think it was a 2000 GPM industrial pumper from Clackamas. They're the ones who laid the 5-inch line in. They were right in front of the hardware store. Mark and I were assigned to pull a portable deck gun off of it, and we dropped it in front of the structure, right in front of the hardware store. And
Was this a defensive fire from the beginning?
oh, absolutely, that at least on this part of the structure, because like I said, it was fully involved. There was no entry. I saw flames in colors that I've never seen before, with the paint and the ammunition and the lacquer thin, everything that was in that. It was actually quite spectacular, and things were blown up in front of us. And so we weren't getting too close to the hardware store. So, but if I recall, we stayed on that portable deck gun for a while. And then somebody pulled an 1 3/4 line down to us, and we used that on the hardware store for a while. I was backing Mark up, and the auto parts store right next door to it, all of a sudden the windows blew out. And so now it's fully involved. So there was a hardware store, an auto parts store, a deli, and a travel agency. Those 4 businesses in the structure, and the hardware store took up probably 1/3 of it by itself. So the flames were blowing out the auto parts store, and we were taught to be very aggressive. And if you were going to attack a fire, you went right to the window and you shoved the nozzle in. You didn't stand back from 30 feet away and spray water at it. You got right up to the window and got water on the seat of the fire. So the natural tendency for us was to go right after it. And Mark had been on the nozzle for a while, and I offered to take it from him, and so we moved over towards the auto parts store, and he was pulling the hose line, straightening it out so we'd have a little bit better attack, so it wasn't pulling against us.
Mm-hmm.
And I stepped up to the window of the hardware store when I heard a pop, crack, something. I looked over my shoulder, and here came the mansard overhang. So basically everything went black at that point. I am now down on my hands and knees with the roof on my back. Mark said that he jumped back, the roof ripped the hose right out of his hands and basically squashed the hose line. And 1 minute he was looking at my back, and the next minute he's looking at a pile of rubble in front of him. And his first thoughts were, Mike's dead. There's absolutely no way he's coming out of this. And he said that they started digging through the clay tile, and people were coming off the street who had seen it happen. And he said there was about 12 people digging through, trying to gain access to me, which basically was futile because there was all the plywood decking from the mansard overhang. So what later was determined is the roof weighed 900 to 1,000 pounds per roofing square. So that's roughly a 10 by 10 area. And this section of roof that fell, 30 feet long by 12 feet high. So you can imagine the kind of weight that was on the roof. And Mark and I talked last night about it, and he was thinking how thankful he was that he wasn't closer to me, because prior to that happening, when I was backing him up, I was right behind him. I had my hand on his shoulder, and we were that close. Had he been that close, he would have caught the edge of the roof. But he just happened to be far enough back because he's trying to straighten out the hose. He said he was about 10 feet back. And all of a sudden, he heard a pop, and boom, it was down, and I was gone.
But it probably could have been just a matter of a few seconds, and he would have been right up to where that roof edge was.
Exactly. Or had I been back a foot, it probably would have caught me on the edge as well. And he said it was enough weight that it pinched off the hose. It squashed the hose. So even if I had been aware of my nozzle, I wouldn't have had any water. So I'm on the other side of the roof, like I said, down on my hands and knees. And
Did it kind of collapse like a lean-to kind of collapse with a like a voided space underneath the collapse, and that's where you're at?
it's hard to say, but yeah, the doorway was in by about 5 feet. So I had a little bit of an opening. So I couldn't tell you exactly, what the roof was, because it was probably a plywood under the roof that came down on top of me.
Mm-hmm.
But Mark had said once the roof dropped, all of a sudden there was basically a fireball that came out from it.
Did you have an SCBA on?
I did. And
connected and breathing?
Pardon?
Connected to air and breathing?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's another one of those things that saved me. I mean, I truly believe that it did. And this was an era when we didn't always pack up for an exterior attack.
Right
and
on.
I was one of those who, if I didn't have to pack up, I didn't. Yeah. But we packed up without being told to do so. And of course, these are 30-minute steel bottles. They're demand air masks. They're not positive pressure. No Nomex hood. This is primitive primitive by today's standards. Was I wearing full bunker gear? No, these were day boots. So these, for people who aren't familiar with them, they're basically like fire boots, but with fishing waders. You pull up the legs. We always wore those during the daytime. So I think pretty much everybody on scene probably was wearing those.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't have the kind of thermal protection that somebody today in the same situation would have. And my first reaction was to stand up. And I was able to stand up with the roof on my back. And again, a lot of this is foggy. I think a lot of it was foggy right afterwards because of just the way the incident occurred. It's hard to recall everything that went on. But I do remember trying to move and not being able to go anywhere. I figured the weight of the roof on my air pack was enough that it kept me basically pinned under the roof, even though I was now standing up. And
describe what the environment was around you. Was it hot? Was it smoky? Could you see flames?
I was 5 feet from the front door of the auto parts store, which is fully involved. So I had 2 windows and a double glass door and about 5 feet between me and the fully involved auto parts store.
So it's hot.
And what we didn't know was that the fire had spread through the mansard. So now I had fire behind me that had been burning inside the mansard. So what happened, without really giving us any signs, is that fire had spread through the mansard and burned off the 2x4 supports, the vertical supports. And probably by today's standards, you would look at things and say, oh, I see some signs. I can read the smoke and I see there's stuff coming out, and I probably shouldn't have been under there. But at the time, we just didn't have that kind of knowledge, and there was nobody directing us. And to be honest with you, I don't think the officers on scene would have known otherwise. So it was just a different era.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And for anybody who's not from that era, they might struggle to understand or even to be critical of how things were then. But the fire service has evolved and is substantially different in our incident command, in our safety, and how we read buildings and read smoke. And, a lot of that has really developed over the course of the last 30 to 40 years. I mean, we're talking back at a time, as you're saying, everything you're saying, it's actually even making me have chills because it is so aligned. I got into fire service in 79. So it's so aligned to everything you're saying is like spot on to exactly the mindset, how we looked at things, how we ran things, and very different than today, but it was what it was then.
Right. There was no RIT. That term didn't exist.
No.
Pass devices didn't exist. we had 3 portable radios in the whole department, so firefighters didn't have one.
Right.
So, yeah, things are definitely different.
Yeah. Okay, so you stood up. You got fire in front of you, fire behind you.
I panicked. I think from being trapped, I pulled my mask up and off. So now I'm inside there with no helmet and no mask. Now, 5 minutes after the incident, I denied that I took my mask off. But when you think about physics, there's no way that the helmet and the mask can come off from the back forward. So the only explanation was that in my panic, I pulled the hose up and off went my helmet and my mask. So now I'm aware of flames that are coming around my head. I can feel it. I can see the flames. I know I'm getting burned.
Thank you, Fire Chief Mike Beutler, for sharing the details of your near miss. If you like this show, you can subscribe to ensure that you never miss an episode. For you podcast listeners, search for SA Matters Radio on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, or iHeartRadio. For those of you watching the video version of the show, you can subscribe to SA Matters TV on YouTube. In addition to this show, we also teach classes on situational awareness and high-risk decision-making. Our instructors have helped more than 1,300 organizations and have trained more than 85,000 individuals to improve high-risk decision-making. This includes first responders, industrial workers, military personnel, business leaders, medical professionals, utility workers, highway workers, public transportation operators, aviation workers, oil refinery process operators, and more. If someone you know works in a high-risk, high-consequence, decision-making environment, we are here to help improve their safety and their survival, and to help them accomplish the most important mission of all, and that is to go home to the ones who love them. I'd like to take a moment to honor and thank some of the recent training and consulting clients. The Coastal Bend Regional Advisory Council in Corpus Christi, Texas. The Safety Plus Conference in New Orleans, Louisiana. The Illinois Fire Chiefs Association. And the International Electric Linemen's Rodeo. If you're interested in attending one of our upcoming programs, here's where we're going to be next. On October 28th at the Colorado Department of Transportation Safety Seminar in Loveland, Colorado. November 5 through 7, a corporate consulting contract for one of the world's top 5 biotechnology companies. Confidentiality agreements prohibit me from actually mentioning them by name. November 14 to 17, the International Association of Fire Chiefs Volunteer and Combination Officer Section Symposium in the Sun in Clearwater Beach, Florida. November 19th, back to the corporate client to conduct situational awareness training for their employees based on the consulting that we did earlier in the month. November 23rd, the County of Grand Prairie Fire Services in Grand Prairie, Alberta. December 2nd, the Florida Fire Chiefs Association Safety Conference in Lake Buena Vista, Florida. December 4th, ExxonMobil Safety Meeting in Galveston, Texas. January 8th, another corporate consulting project for a different company, this one near Syracuse, New York. January 11th, the Lincoln County Fire Chiefs Association in Denver, North Carolina. If you want to see the locations of all the upcoming events, just head over to the samatters.com website and click on the red tab labeled Upcoming Events Schedule. If you're interested in hosting a program, just click the Contact Us tab on the top of the homepage, and I'll give you a call. If you want to become part of the SA Matters community of learners, there are several ways you can do that. Check the show notes for how to get connected with us by signing up for our monthly newsletter, which is free, by subscribing to the SA Matters radio podcast, which is free, by subscribing to the SA Matters TV YouTube channel, which is free, and how to follow us on the social media channels of Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, which are obviously all free. There we share ideas about how to improve situational awareness, how to make better decisions under stress, and how to improve the skills of critical thinking and resilient problem solving. Well, that's it. Episode 292 of the Situational Awareness Matters show is complete. Thank you again to my guest, Fire Chief Mike Beutler. Thank you to our platinum sponsor, Midwest Fire. Thank you to our feature segment sponsor, SimsUShare. And thank you to our associate sponsor, Chief Miller. Thank you to all the companies, agencies, and organizations and associations that have hosted Situational Awareness Matters training programs for their employees. Thank you to all the organizations that have hosted a live stream training program where I come to your organization live via the internet to train your members. Thank you to the more than 3,500 students and graduates of the highly acclaimed Situational Awareness Matters Online Academy. The feedback I've received from Academy graduates is just amazing and humbling, and I thank you for that. And most importantly, thank you, the listeners and viewers of this show, for sharing some of your valuable time with me today. I really appreciate your support of the SA Matters mission. Be safe out there, and may the peace of the Lord and strong situational awareness be with you always.
You've been listening to the Situational Awareness Matters radio show with Dr. Richard B. Gassaway. If you are interested in learning more about situational awareness, human factors, and decision-making under stress, visit samatters.com. If you are interested in booking Dr. Gassaway for an upcoming event, visit his personal website at richgassaway.com.